I was raised from a very young age. My mom was raised Wisconsin Synod Lutheran, and my father was raised a Baptist. So not only was God a man, he was a scary dude. You didn't want to cross this guy. And you know what? I didn't like him. I didn't like him. How can you love someone that you're so totally afraid of? No matter what you did. So my parents got the hell out of Wisconsin because they didn't like their tradition either, and they took the train to California. And from the time I was a little girl, they sent me off to Sunday school because they wanted me to be normal, as if that would ever happen. And they taught me about reincarnation. So they would say, I would go to Sunday school and they would learn about that, and I'd say, Mommy, if God is love, then why would God send people to hell? She'd say, Honey, we don't believe that. We believe in reincarnation. It's like, why are you sending me to these people? So that went on for quite a while. You know, I was quite resistant. I realized I was trying to prepare this talk, as it were, this spiritual journey. And it just wasn't, I was feeling so resistant to doing so. For one thing, I'm not comfortable really talking about myself. It's how is that possibly useful for anybody else? Second of all, it's like, what do we really mean by a spiritual journey? Because in some sense, I don't know where this journey began, and I haven't reached the end of it. So I'm sort of like you're in the middle of The Godfather and you're just watching Sonny getting killed. And it's like, so how can I talk about this part right now? So let me just share with you where the part of the film that I can tell you about so far, and hopefully it will be universal enough that there'll be some part that we can all relate to, and you can say, yeah, I know what that feels like. Yeah, I can see that. So when I was a little, first of all, as a Hindu, we believe in reincarnation. So we believe that when we come into this life, we're coming in on some sort of trajectory. We've got impressions, desires from previous lives, things that we did in our past lives, things that we thought about, things that we longed for, things that we left uncompleted, desires. I want to do this, I want to do that. But before you're able to fulfill all these desires in one lifetime, your body goes. Your mind's still there, though, and that mind will take another body in a family and in a place where you can fulfill your journey, your spiritual journey. So I came into this crazy family that was looking for something more. So in this trajectory that my life has been taking, looking back now, I can see my little girl self and thinking, wow, I was kind of on that trajectory from an early age, and I didn't even know it. I would play with dolls, and I'd make them into little nuns. And I'd take chairs, and bottom part, I'd make little churches, and all these pious little dolls would go in there and take communion. Now, mind you, between a Baptist on one side and a Wisconsin Synod Lutheran on the other, they don't take no truck with Catholics. Catholics were Papists. You did not ever go near a Catholic anything. So I found myself sneaking away, looking for Catholic nuns and following them, like on the James Bond mission, spotted one. I'm going to follow one and see what they do. And I'd see this is like pre-Vatican II, so they'd have the penguin outfit and the big rosary, and I'd look at that rosary and I think, man, that's beautiful. So I snuck off to Woolworths and I got myself a rosary. And then I snuck up and I got a little thing on how to use a rosary, and I started doing that because it seemed so beautiful. And I'd go off when my mom and dad weren't watching, I'd sneak off into a Catholic church and I'd find a statue of Mary. And I would just love to sit in front of that statue and just pray. I didn't know how to pray, it's like, you're so beautiful. You're so beautiful. And I didn't know what I should pray for or what I should do, but the silence and the prayerfulness and the smells and the old ladies sitting in the back doing their prayers, it was so attractive to me. I just loved it. I just loved it. On the other hand, I would pull down drapes at the house, and I would go outside and I'd drape myself like a sari. You know, how exotic. It's like, I had never seen a sari in my life, but there I was draping myself. I was looking at old pictures and said, where the hell did that come from? Did you have to use those tacky curtains? So you can kind of see where these things were kind of playing forth. One of my earliest and most powerful memories was being at the Obispo Theater in San Luis Obispo, going with my brother for a double feature on a Saturday afternoon. That's a great place to stick your kids where, it's like, okay, mom and dad get to have time off. Go to the theater, bye. So my brother was watching the Westerner, and I was bored to death, so I just went into the bathroom, the old-style bathrooms where you get to sit down and do your makeup in those little cushy chairs, and you look in the mirror and I didn't have any makeup, so I just looked in the mirror. And I looked more and more, and I kept touching my face and saying to myself, this is me. This is me. Just get used to it. This is me. Because when I looked at myself, I didn't believe that it was me. In some way, it seemed like this foreign object that had just been put over me. In some way, I didn't believe that this body that I was now wearing was me. And I was trying to convince myself in some bizarre way. It's one of the strongest memories I have. So why did this body seem unfamiliar? Because there was in some way that I just couldn't believe that that was all there was. When I was young and tried playing nun, it wasn't like I wasn't a hellraiser. I was such a pain in the ass as a kid, and even worse as a teenager. But at the same time, I had this profound dissatisfaction. And I tell people will come up to me, and they say, well, gee, I'll be walking down the street, and I'll have my jeans on, and they'll say, oh, well, what do you do for a living? And I'll say, I'm actually a Hindu nun. And they'll go, what? And then I didn't even know there were Hindus. Yeah, there not only are there, but I am one. I live in a convent of Hindu nuns, if you can believe that, in Montecito yet, near Oprah and Ellen. I know, it's so bizarre. And they'll say, I always wanted to be a nun. And I've had that, or men will say, I'd always thought about becoming a priest or a monk. And this happens, because at first I'd go, really? You see him and really? Because they seem like the least likely person. And the more I talk about being a nun, the more I hear the same story. I'd always wanted to be a nun. And I think in one sense, this is a universal. There's a sense in which all of us are sort of looking for something more than what this world has to offer. There's something more than, we all don't want to sign up for the get married, have kids, get a job, go back home, watch television, do all that, buy some more stuff, have grandkids, show your pictures to everybody you know. And this be the sign of your life. We're always looking for something deeper and more. That what we are supposed to sign up for, that what our society and world says, this is your job, this is what you're going to do, and this, you know what? You're not going to do it, but you're going to like it. And this, you're going to be satisfied with this. And I think in some way, it's a universal. That in some way, me as a little girl seeking out the silence of that church is much more universal than I've ever I just thought I was weird. I didn't realize that everybody else is a little weird too. That everybody has that place where they're seeking the solace of something deep within their hearts. Something that they can walk into a place and feel the holiness, no matter what religion or sect it belongs to. You can sit down and go, yes, this is true. This is true. Whatever's going on in here is real. That there's a real connection to the divine. So I had this sort of longing, which in the early 60s became funneled into that great answer to all questions for teenagers, which is rock and roll. And the Beatles. And later it became, gospel and various other forms. But it became sort of that frenetic, externalized activity. It's like Everything out there is boring except for this. This is great. This is interesting. Rock and roll does it for me. And then I became quite the social activist. When I was 13, I was out there with the Cesar Chavez group boycotting grapes. And that felt better because I was outside my small little self. All of us want to do something than live a little life. And there was something I wanted from a very young age, and that was not to lead a little life. When I was with my little girlfriend in a swimming pool in 1964, she said, well, who are you going to marry? I said, I don't know, but I don't think my life is going to be an ordinary life. And she said, you always were weird. Yeah, I'm proud of that. That you want something more than just what this world is saying you should be satisfied with. So I wanted to do something for, not only for myself, to have a larger life myself, but that you could do something for someone else. I asked one of the Mexican Americans there, he said he was a widow. I said, what happened to your wife? And he said, she died. I said, oh my God, of what? And he said, she didn't get enough to eat. She got TB. Oh, that hits home when you're 13. So when I became, when I came to Santa Barbara a little later, I was very dissatisfied with the Unitarian Church. First I was an Episcopalian, and that didn't work for me, so then I went to the Unitarians, and they were actually more worldly than I was. And I think things have changed since then, but the whole thing was so much on social activism that they were much more externalized than I was. But I thought, well, do something good. So I became very involved in the anti-war movement. I would wake up every morning and just say, oh, the war is still going on. I haven't tried hard enough. Every morning I would say, first coming to consciousness, I haven't tried hard enough to stop this war. So my whole life, my whole being was to save America from itself and the Vietnamese from being murdered by us who were trying to go and help them, so-called. It was the obsession of my life. And this was going on, and my whole life was, stop the war machine, bomb the Pentagon, let's do whatever we can to stop. So it's like, if you can be violent, do it. Do it. Violence deserves violence. We've done violence, we'll serve them tit for tat, we'll stop that. And everything was going fine, and I was on an I was in Women's Strike for Peace. So they paired us up one Sunday morning in August of 1967, and we were going to go out and leaflet churches because we were going to have a big peace march. Peaceful people. We were going to have a big peace march down the main center of town in Santa Barbara. And so we were organizing it and went to distribute pamphlets. So we hit the Catholic Church, and then we had all these pamphlets left. So this man that I was paired with said, well, let's go up to the Vedanta temple. And I said, what's that? And he said, oh, it's this beautiful place. It's got a big parking lot. It was not only the parking lot, but the cars in the parking lot, and specifically the windshield wipers in the parking lot, because we had our leaflets, and we went into the cars, and we lifted up every single windshield wiper and put it in a little pamphlet about how we were going to have our peace march. So we did that, and the place was full. It was the early 1967, so it was during the time of the Maharishi had arrived, the Beatles were meditating, so everybody was there. So he said, the guy that I was paired with said, well, let's go in there. And I looked at this place, and I said, well, can we go in there? He said, yeah, it's really cool. It's got a great atmosphere. So we went in, and we sat down, and there was this visiting Swami who was giving a talk. And we had to sit way in the front because we had to sit in the steps in the front. And he was the thinnest thing I'd ever seen in my life. The first thing I thought was, I don't want to be associated with any people who are fasting. It's like, ugh, don't give me this Gandhi routine, So I thought, no. And then I couldn't understand a word he was saying except for God, he had a very thick accent, and he was talking very much like that, and it was like totally lost on me. And God, get me away from this skinny guy who says, God. Because probably his God or something not going to like in the first place. He hasn't stopped this freaking war in Vietnam. So at the end, he was thanked by this little Swami, kind of a little sweet pumpkin. Obviously, he wasn't doing any fasting. And He wasn't like fat, but he was just sort of round and sweet looking. And so at the end, we went and shook the hands of the visiting Swami, who was like that. And then I went next to Swami Prabhavananda, who was the founder of that center, I later discovered. And he was that very soft, gentle, and he just very gently took my hand, and I looked into his eyes, and I started to cry. And I was humiliated, because my whole life was in Stop the War Machine, and I was paralyzed. I couldn't move. I just looked at him and was crying. I had never in my life, in all my searches, in all the synagogues and churches and different Protestant denominations and everything that I'd been through, I'd never actually encountered a holiness so tangible that it knocked me off my bearings. He just, with one little smile, just poured out love, a very simple smile, and that radiant holiness that absolutely transformed me in a second. And I was paralyzed with tears running down my cheek. And I said, to my great embarrassment, "You're so beautiful." And he laughed. And I walked down the stairs. And I couldn't get him or that place out of my mind. And I just kept coming back and coming back and coming back. And all my ideas about saving the world through my ideas about how to save the world. So I asked him later, I said, "Swami, what do we do to get peace?" And he laughed, very little. He said, "You cannot give peace unless you are peaceful. Unless you have peace in your own heart, you will not be able to give anybody peace." And then I realized you can't stop a war or teach others to be peaceful by shoving something down their throat with anger. Unless we have peace and love in our own hearts, we cannot hope to touch another human being. We can't even transform ourselves. So it has to be from the inside out. And that has been my great lesson, which I'm still learning, which is still part of my journey. So at that point I thought, I'm going to be a nun. I'm going to be beautiful, and my feet will not touch the ground, and I will be so pious, and I will be so holy, and everyone will know how holy I am. And when I meditate, I will go here, and I will sit, and I will be so obviously deep in meditation. Are you noticing how deep in meditation? That was cool. It was so hip at the time. And so I was going to go off to college, and I did, and then I got boyfriend number one. I thought, well, I'm obviously not non-material, am I? Discovered how much I like the boys. Then I went off to UC Santa Cruz, and my best friend there said, "Oh, I'm gonna bring my boyfriend's best friend. You're gonna love him." And I thought, yeah, well, I'm gonna be a nun. You just don't know how holy I am. So I saw this person from the end of the parking lot, and I literally said, "Oh shit," because I did fall in love with him. I totally fell in love with him. He was the nicest, kindest, smartest, sweetest man I'd ever met in my life. We shared every interest, and he became my significant other in my life. So obviously I wasn't non-material. Obviously I wasn't meant to do that. Obviously I was certainly, if I could be that worldly and fell in love with a man who was so fabulous in every respect, I was not non-material. So we just set up house, and that was fine with me. And that was, I went through college, I got my degree, I taught for a while, and I thought, well, this is what I thought being a professor of literature would be another high-minded thing, until I actually started teaching there and realized how vicious the academic world is, how unthinkably unkind it is, how unthinkably competitive and mean some of these people are with each other. I was really quite horrified. So I took a break. I'd finished my coursework, but hadn't finished my dissertation. So I thought, I need to spend some time just writing my dissertation. So I wanted to go down with my significant other to Los Angeles, so I could spend some time. I would just get a job, make a lot of money, and then write my dissertation, take time off, write my dissertation, that I could go back and teach, right? So all this is going along, and I'm living a very happy, surface life. My life is very happy. I've got a man who loves me that I love. We've got a nice house. We're going to the art museum for openings. We're doing a lot of music. And I'm going to the temple on Sundays, which is what normal people do. And you listen to a lecture and that's it. And I can put in a little meditation when I remember. And that's fine, right? I'm going to fit in. And then two really terrible things happened to me, which were the best things that ever happened in my life. I was going to work one day, and in my beautiful little MG Midget, it was so old that it didn't have a neck rest, so that when the car behind me didn't bother to brake and plowed right into me, and I was spun around 4 lanes of traffic, and mercifully didn't get hit by any other car, when I got into the hospital, they said, "We're taking x-rays because they thought my neck was broken." You see, I had no feeling from my neck down. I couldn't move my fingers or my toes. I could feel the tears coming down my cheeks, and when one of my coworkers came there and he tried to hold my hand, but I couldn't feel it. And then he started crying too. And the first thought that came to my mind, lying there thinking, great, you're 24 years old and you're a freaking paraplegic. First thing that came to my mind is, now I can't be a nun. And I thought, that's a hell of a thing to think of when you're a paraplegic and you're lying here in the ER waiting for them to come in with the x-ray results. But I thought, I can't believe I'm thinking this right now. I can't believe that of all the things that would cross my mind, that this is what I'm thinking of. And it haunted me. And so then the doctor came in. He said, "I've got good news for you. Your neck is not broken." But I had to be in the hospital. I was in rehab for a long time. I had double vision for 6 months. I had to wear special glasses. I was in a lot of pain. And then I went back to work. And the next month, I was swallowed by such a crippling depression that I literally couldn't get out of bed. I went into a fetal position and just stayed there. So I went to, decided, man, do I need therapy? So I went into, first psychotherapist I went to, he said, well, you obviously have to change religions. And I thought, no, I'm going to change shrinks. This is not working for me. So I went to a woman shrink. I thought, well, she will understand. So I went to the woman shrink. She said, well, you need hospitalization. I thought, no way. I'm going to have that on my work record. Are you kidding me? And that'll make it, my fear, even deeper. My terror of going completely out of my mind even deeper. So then I went to the third. And he was a wonderful guy. It really helped me a lot. And after we'd been through a little more therapy, he said, you know, I'm not allowed to say this. But you know what, unless you try being a nun, you're never going to be able to live with yourself. And I knew he was right. So I said to him, may I ask you a question? He said, yeah. I said, are you Catholic? He said, why? I said, were you a priest? And he said, yes, I beg you not to tell my other patients. It will affect their relationship with me. And he said, how did you know? I said, I can always smell them. He understood the workings of the divine. He understood that sometimes you need God, or the Divine Mothers, I prefer to think, to hit me over the head with a sledgehammer to get my attention. Because I was trying so hard to fit in, to be content on the surface of life, that I didn't want my little life disturbed, because I didn't want my life, my beautiful ship, to get unended. I didn't want to hurt my man's feelings. I didn't want to leave him. I was worried about him. I loved him. How do you leave someone you love? So I talked to him about it, and he said, I know. Unless you try it, you're never going to be able to live with yourself. When we decided to get together, I said, you know, I've always had the feeling I'm going to be a nun. He said, if you ever want to be a nun, I will never stand in your way. Was I fortunate? He was the one person who supported me while every other person said, you're selfish, you're self-centered. How can you do that? And I thought, well, I have to do that because I'm square peg trying to fit into a round hole, and I can't cut myself down on the sides anymore. I can't. And I've probably read everything Thomas Merton had to write. And one thing that he said absolutely stuck in my gut, and that was one of the things you read at the end of the Asian Journal, where he was giving these conferences in Bangkok on monasticism. And he says, a monastic life is the act of utter and absolute rebellion. It's like, I refuse to engage in this. I refuse to engage in a world where I'm supposed to be satisfied with a little life. I refuse to be part of this. I refuse to acknowledge that I'm supposed to be happy with a husband or a wife or children and a job, and I get home and I do my part for the world and I watch television and that's it. I want something more. I'm not satisfied with this. I refuse. I'm going to turn my back on what the world expects me to like and want and desire. I've had it. Goodbye, over and out. And so I did. I became a nun. And the other terrible thing that happened to me that was the best thing that ever happened to me is after 7 years of being a nun, I hit a wall. And that wall was, okay, after 7 years, you know the routine. You know, the shine sort of gets a little dull. You learn all the routines. There's a lot to learn being a nun. All these different rituals you have to know, and these talks that you give, and all the little things to clean and cook and take care of guests and do all that sort of thing. It can be as externalized as you want it to be, and that's just where I went. Because I put all of my effort into, I'm going to be a nun. It nearly killed me. It ripped my gut apart to have to make that decision to become a nun. So once I crossed, I jumped over that crevice, and I made it to the other side. I went, whew, that nearly killed me, but I made it. Here I am. I'm a nun. It took me 7 years to realize. I took my mind with me on that big jump. And that can be seen from the other side, too, because so many people say, well, you know, I always want to lead a spiritual life, but, you know, my fate was such that I just never did become a nun or a priest or a monk. It's like, well, what about waking up in the morning and having coffee with your spouse? You can't think that your external circumstances make or break your spiritual life. And that was my big stupidity. It's like this little universe that we're carrying around with us, it goes from place to place. It doesn't care where you live. You take that sucker with you. And so this thing was being just as self-centered, just as egotistic, just as bullheaded, no matter whether I was in a relationship or at the university or working at a job that was paying me lots of money, or as being a nun. And I had to confront that little beast. I had to realize how externalized I'd become and to actually deal with that. That when I sat down for meditation, I had to really go in there and not get distracted. Because you can sit and people think you're meditating, but you can be thinking about all sorts of things. You really can, and no one knows the difference except for you if you really think about it. So you have to really dig deep and dive deep. And it became really apparent to me that I wasn't making my own life deep enough, and that it didn't matter what you were doing with your outside life. A very big turning point in my life was going to India and spending a lot of time with our order there, which in India is called the Ramakrishna Order or the Ramakrishna Mat and Mission. In India, we're the largest social service organization. We work with educating the poor. We have many hospitals. We do everything from digging latrines, making toilets for people, doing birth control clinics, rebuilding houses in times of riots. We never take sides. Rebuilding homes from typhoons and floods and trying to kill each other and all those sorts of things. It was inspiring for me. One old monk in particular, I loved. He was in his 80s, and every day when he would talk to us, he'd get old hospital gloves, because they had a big hospital there, and he cut them up to use as rubber bands. He didn't want to waste the money that could be used towards a patient rather than wasting it on buying rubber bands. He cut up those old hospital gloves. He was the first one to meditate at 3:30 in the morning, set bolt upright. And he would tell me about how they first started the hospital in Benares or Varanasi. They would find people lying in the gutter, covered in feces, covered in maggots. They'd pick them up, and they'd just take them home with them and clean them up. That time, they didn't even have enough money to buy real good medicines, just medicine, just whatever they could do, and just clean them up. And eventually, donations started coming, and they raised money. They'd go door to door asking for money, and they would buy medications to give people, and many of our monks trained as doctors so they could serve. Well, our place in Varanasi is equally divided, as is all of our Ramakrishna centers, into both places for meditation and places for service. Because if God dwells in our hearts, he dwells in all beings' hearts. And if you want to worship God, you don't just go to the temple and throw in a flower or light an incense. You worship that embodiment of divinity right in front of you. That person who's asking for money on the street, that person who's covered in maggots and feces, that person who is the most annoying brat of a child, that person who is at the four-way stop not waiting his turn. So that monk made a great impression on me. One day he was going in the hospital. Sometimes if you're carrying, he would go from patient to patient and remove the feces from patient to patient, and the load was becoming very heavy. And pretty soon he was carrying a big bucket. It was too heavy, so he carried that bucket on his head. And he was walking. And the other Swami was the Swami in charge of meditation said, "Oh, are those your worship vessels you're carrying on your head?" And he said, "Yes, as a matter of fact, they are." And that's what I think we should all be doing today. That whatever we're doing, that is our worship. And that's what I sort of failed to realize all these years. And that's my journey now. That wherever we are, whatever we're doing, you don't have to change your whole life. You don't have to jump over a crevice. That crevice presents itself every time you look at another being. Every time you see other. Every time you see difference. Every time you see that person is different from me. I don't want to be like them. They shouldn't try to be like me. We're crossing over that crevice. And so I invite you on your own spiritual journey, and I hope you have love and joy and success.